Every night before bed, a father and his son knelt together and prayed. The father had the names of two men he wanted his boy to grow up to be like: Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, Confederate generals, Virginia blood, warriors who had fought outnumbered and won, or fought outnumbered and died trying. Every night, the father said their names out loud and asked God to make his son as brave as they were. The boy grew up. He became a Marine. He went to Vietnam. A landmine took both his legs, most of his fingers, and the man he had been. He came home in a wheelchair, wrote a book about it that won the Pulitzer Prize, and then, on a spring night in 1994, he ended his own life. The father had been dead for 23 years by then. He never saw what Vietnam did to his son. He never had to stand in a doorway and look at the boy he'd raised to be a warrior, broken, legless, drinking, and ask himself whether the prayers he'd said every night had been a blessing or a curse. The father's name was Lewis Burwell Puller. The Marines called him Chesty. He was the most decorated Marine in the history of the United States Marine Corps. 5 Navy Crosses, 4 wars, 37 years of service. The kind of man other men tell stories about in bars and barracks for the rest of their lives. But the story that matters most isn't the 5 Navy Crosses. It's the space between a father who loved war and a son who was destroyed by it. Lewis Burwell Puller was born on June 26, 1898, in West Point, Virginia. His father, Matthew, died when Lewis was 10. His mother, Martha, raised him and his siblings alone. The family was proud, Southern, and poor, descendants of Virginians who had fought in the Civil War and never quite recovered from losing it. Lewis grew up on stories of his grandfather, John Puller, who had been killed by Union fire at the skirmish at Kelly's Ford. He was a second cousin of George S. Patton. War was in the family the way farming was in other families. Not something you chose, but something you inherited. He enrolled at the Virginia Military Institute in 1917, desperate to fight in the First World War before it ended. When the armistice was signed in November 1918, Puller, still in training, still too young, still furious, dropped out of VMI and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant, then almost immediately decommissioned as the Marine Corps downsized after the war. They didn't need him. Puller refused to leave. He re-enlisted as a private, an officer willingly dropping to the lowest rank in the Corps because walking away wasn't something he knew how to do. He was sent to Haiti as a gendarme officer, leading native troops against Kako rebels in the jungle. He was 21 years old, commanding men in close-quarters jungle combat, and he was in love with it. Haiti taught him everything that would define his career: how to lead men who didn't speak his language, how to fight in terrain that favored the enemy, how to take a small, outnumbered force and make it hit harder than a force twice its size. He was shot at, ambushed, and nearly killed multiple times. He was recommissioned as a second lieutenant in 1924 and sent to Nicaragua, where the Marines were fighting Augusto Sandino's guerrilla forces. In 5 years of jungle fighting, Puller earned his first 2 Navy Crosses. 2 of the 5. He was 34 years old. He had been fighting for over a decade, and the wars that would make him a legend hadn't even started yet. In the 1930s, Puller was stationed in China with the Marine detachments in Shanghai and Beijing. He watched the Japanese army operate. He studied their tactics, their discipline, their willingness to die. He filed away everything he saw. When the Pacific War began, Major Lewis Puller was given command of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. He took them to Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal was the first major American ground offensive of the war. 6 months of brutal jungle fighting on a malaria-infested island in the Solomons. Puller's battalion was tasked with holding a section of the perimeter around Henderson Field, the captured airstrip that was the strategic prize of the entire campaign. On the night of October 24, 1942, the same night that John Basilone was fighting off 3,000 Japanese soldiers a short distance away, Puller's battalion was hit by a massive Japanese assault along the Matanakaw River. The Japanese came in waves, probing, attacking, retreating, attacking again. Puller walked the line. Not from a command post, not from behind cover. He walked the firing line, moving from foxhole to foxhole, checking on his men, adjusting positions, redistributing ammunition. When the phone lines were cut by shell fire, he ran messages himself. When a gap opened in the line, he plugged it with cooks, clerks, and bandsmen, anyone who could hold a rifle. The line held. The Japanese assault broke. Puller was awarded his third Navy Cross. At Cape Gloucester, New Britain, in late 1943, Puller led his battalion through some of the worst jungle terrain in the Pacific. Torrential rain, mud so deep it swallowed men to their waists. Japanese defenses hidden in undergrowth so thick that you couldn't see the enemy until he was close enough to stab you. Puller's leadership through that nightmare earned him his fourth Navy Cross. 4 Navy Crosses, 2 wars, 25 years of continuous service. Any other Marine would have been satisfied. Chesty Puller was not any other Marine. In September 1950, Colonel Lewis Puller commanded the 1st Marine Regiment during the amphibious landing at Incheon, Korea, one of the most daring operations in military history. General Douglas MacArthur had bet his reputation on a landing behind North Korean lines at a port that military planners considered impossible to assault. Tides of 30 feet, a narrow channel, a fortified seawall. The Marines took it in a day. Puller's regiment led the advance inland toward Seoul, fighting through street-by-street urban combat to recapture the South Korean capital. Then came Chosin. In late November 1950, the Chinese People's Volunteer Army entered the Korean War. 300,000 Chinese soldiers poured across the Yalu River and slammed into the United Nations forces. The 1st Marine Division, including Puller's regiment, was at the Chosin Reservoir, deep in the mountains of northeastern Korea, when 10 Chinese divisions surrounded them. The temperature dropped to minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind cut through every layer of clothing. Weapons froze. Medical supplies froze. The Marines were surrounded, outnumbered, cut off from supply lines, and fighting in conditions that killed men from exposure as efficiently as bullets. When a reporter asked Puller about being surrounded by 10 Chinese divisions, he said, "We've been looking for the enemy for some time now. We finally found him. We're surrounded." That simplifies things. When another reporter asked if the Marines were retreating, Puller corrected him. "Retreat? Hell, we're just attacking in a different direction." Over 13 days, the 1st Marine Division fought its way 78 miles from the Chosin Reservoir to the port of Hungnan, through constant Chinese ambushes, in weather that froze the blood in men's veins before it could hit the ground. They brought out their dead. They brought out their wounded. They brought out their equipment. And they destroyed every Chinese unit that tried to stop them. Puller was awarded his 5th Navy Cross and the Army's Distinguished Service Cross. No other Marine in history has received 5 Navy Crosses. No other Marine is likely to. After Korea, Puller was promoted to Brigadier General, then Major General. He commanded the 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune, but his body was failing. 37 years of war, jungle fever, combat wounds, a decade of tropical disease had taken everything his frame had to give. In 1955, Chesty Puller retired from the United States Marine Corps. He was 57 years old.
He moved to Saluda, Virginia, a quiet town not far from where he'd been born. He didn't go quietly. He couldn't. He was Chesty Puller. He gave speeches. He criticized the modern Marine Corps for going soft. He requested to return to active duty during Vietnam and was denied. He watched the war on television, furious that he couldn't be there, furious at what he saw, furious at everything except the Marines themselves. The Marines worshipped him. They still do. At boot camp in Parris Island and San Diego, drill instructors end each day with the command, "Good night, Chesty Puller, wherever you are." Recruits repeat it. It has been a tradition for decades. Every Marine knows his name. Every Marine knows his quotes. Every Marine has been told at some point in their training to be more like Chesty. Lewis Burwell Puller, Jr. was born in 1945. He grew up in his father's shadow, the son of the most famous Marine alive, raised on prayers to Lee and Jackson, raised to believe that war was the highest calling a man could answer. In 1968, at 23, Lewis Jr. deployed to Vietnam as a Marine lieutenant. On October 11, 1968, he stepped on a booby-trapped howitzer round. The explosion took both of his legs above the knee. It took most of the fingers on both hands. It destroyed his left arm. It nearly killed him. He was 23 years old, the same age his father had been when he was fighting rebels in Haiti. Lewis Jr. came home to a country that didn't want to hear about Vietnam, and a body that couldn't do the things his father had taught him to value. He struggled with alcoholism. He struggled with depression. He struggled with the impossible weight of being a legless man named Puller.
In 1991, he published Fortunate Son, a memoir about growing up as Chesty Puller's son and coming home from Vietnam in a wheelchair. It won the Pulitzer Prize for biography. It was one of the most honest books ever written about the cost of war. Not the cost measured in medals and citations, but the cost measured in broken men and broken families. On May 11, 1994, Lewis Burwell Puller, Jr. killed himself at his home in Virginia. He was 48 years old. His father had been dead for 23 years. Chesty Puller died on October 11, 1971, at the age of 73, at the Naval Hospital in Hampton, Virginia. A stroke. The wars he'd survived couldn't kill him, but time could. He was buried at Christ Church Cemetery in Saluda with full military honors. The Marine Corps he had served for 37 years sent him off the way they send off their greatest. There's a bronze statue of him at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico. There's a road named after him at Camp Lejeune. There's a ship, the USNS Lewis B. Puller, that bears his name. Every Marine recruit who has graduated from boot camp in the last half-century has said his name before they went to sleep. 5 Navy crosses, the Banana Wars, Guadalcanal, Cape Gloucester, Inchon, Chosin. 4 wars, 37 years, the most decorated Marine in history. But the thing that stays isn't the medals or the quotes or the statue. It's a father kneeling beside his son every night, praying for him to be brave. And a son who was brave, who went where his father's name sent him, and paid for it with everything he had. We're surrounded. That simplifies things. It did. Until it didn't.